Hi, my name's Meg, and welcome back to my channel. This week we are going to take a look at my reading journal, and we're going to do a January reading wrap-up. This journal is themed after Around the World in 80 Days, and each month is going to be a different destination or country. In my last video on this journal, you can see that we set up my winter or Q1 TBR with all of the books that I'd like to... Hello, Osiris. My winter or Q1 TBR, and I've listed out all of the books that I'd like to get to this quarter. You can see that I did manage to get a few done, and we will get into January here. In my Q1, I mentioned that all 3 months of January, February, March are going to be in Europe, and I figured let's start the year where the story of Around the World in 80 Days starts, which is in London. All right, well, while he's here, I'm going to go through the materials. So first off, I have a couple sets of washi tape. These cards I bought on Amazon. They're pretty inexpensive. If I know that I'm going to be using a set of washi tape, then I'll wrap them onto these. Most of my paper washi tapes I did this with just for storage. This definitely stores a lot more easily than a whole bunch of rolls. But both of these sets of washi tape came from Amazon. I like these neutrals, so I'll be using some of these. I also have these cards. I think that I got these from maybe Daiso, but these are sold all over the internet and in some craft stores, journaling supply stores, so I don't think that I'll be able to link these particular ones down below, but you'll be able to find something similar almost anywhere that you're looking. I got this great little pack of stickers from Journal Say. Comes in a tin. And as you can see, the theme of this tin is London, so I thought that I'd pull out a few stickers that might work really well for this theme. But I really like these because they come with quite a few stickers in there, and I enjoy that it's not wrapped in so much plastic, and the tins are reusable. I will try to link this below, but this is the Vintage Travel paper pack from Michaels. And I like that it's actually a map of London. And last but not least, I've got my pens. So these were already covered in my currently inked for January video. That was a couple weeks ago. And so I've got my TWSBI Eco Sapphire, and it is inked with just a little bit of Waringel's Valley of Fear. I've got this Jinhao 86 in gray with Earl Grey by Diamine in it. And then I've got this Jinhao X450 in red with Diamine's Syrah, which I think is a good complement to the red sheen that you'll see on the Valley of Fear ink. So, with all of that out of the way, we'll go ahead and get started. Oh yes, this is very helpful. Thank you, Osiris. Are you comfortable? That's looking good. We're going to move down into the books section of the journal now. This is the copy that I read. It's not a terribly long book, but I think that this version is quite beautiful. I like the green and the gold together. You'll notice that I have tabs along the side of the book here. That's what I do with almost any of the physical books that I read. I like to tab it. And then I also have a key. I did not write down when I actually finished, which was the 19th of January. I started the book on December 2nd. I finished it on the 19th of January. It should not have taken me that long to read this short of a book. I was also on vacation during some of this time, and it just wasn't quite gripping me the entire way through the book, so it was hard to pick up at times. In these recaps of books that I'm going to be doing in my reading wrap-ups, I will not be saying any spoilers out loud, but I can't give you that same guarantee on the written word because my book journal is for me. So I am going to put in plot points that I found important, and that could include a spoiler. Around the World in 80 Days follows Mr. Phileas Fogg, a man who has built his life around a strict, self-imposed routine, and he makes a wildly uncharacteristic choice as he accepts a wager at his London Gentlemen's Club to circumnavigate the globe in just 80 days. His brand new valet, Passepartout, had taken the job that very morning hoping for a quiet, predictable experience with a master whose reputation for structure preceded him. Instead, he's swept into a whirlwind adventure where the pair are constantly comparing reality against Fogg's carefully timed itinerary, solving problems as they arise and encountering a rotating cast of allies and obstacles. All the while, they're pursued by Detective Fix, who is convinced Fogg is behind a recent bank robbery, and alternates between sabotaging and enabling their progress back to London. Overall, I'd give this a solid 4 out of 5 stars. The constantly moving plot and steady stream of logistical challenges made the book engaging, especially when the characters were actively dealing with a new crisis. I was particularly entertained by the contrast between the unflappable Fogg and the passionate Passepartout. Bouncing between these two extremes gave me different perspectives on each situation without exhausting me with either one alone. That said, my engagement wasn't consistent throughout the book. I felt somewhat detached early on, especially as we breezed through Paris and the rest of Europe. At that point, I worried that the entire book would be mostly dialogue and logistics rather than a more immersive travel experience. Things finally clicked for me once the story reached India, and then again in San Francisco. During those stretches, especially while crossing America, the urgency of the journey really came through, and I found it difficult to put the book down. No single character stood out above the others for me. Instead, they felt like extreme representations of specific traits. At times, I found that both amusing and slightly tiresome. Passepartout is all nervous energy, anxiety, and frustration, often without much real utility. Fogg is almost absurdly calm and confident, trusting that everything will fall neatly into place no matter how unlikely the circumstances. Fix pursues them with a stubbornness that seems to stretch beyond reasonable financial or professional logic, and Oda is largely defined by her gratitude and devotion. During some moments, the character started to feel flat. There's also a clear pattern in how these extremes map to stereotypes. Of course, the wealthy English gentleman glides past every obstacle with money and convenient solutions. And of course, this darker European is irrationally emotional. And of course, this Asian woman is quietly loyal and grateful to her rescuer. I never felt emotionally connected to any of them. I remained more of an observer than a participant in their journey. This story is steeped in a 19th century worldview. Colonial structures, power dynamics, and assumptions about whose time, lives, and cultures matter are baked into the narrative. The novel is fascinated with trains, steamers, timetables, the idea that technology can shrink the world and bend distance to the human will. Fogg's obsession with punctuality and routine constantly collides with unforeseen circumstances, accidents, and human emotion, which gives me a bit of like a control versus chance dynamic. And there's a strong sense of duty. Fogg to his wager, Passepartout to Fogg, and Oda to the man who saved her. The speed of progress in technology is particularly relevant today. Verne was writing about a time when traveling around the world in 80 days seemed daring and astonishing. Now we can circumnavigate the globe in a couple of days, and our messages travel almost instantly. We tackle problems and tasks that would have been unimaginable in Verne's era. That continuity of humans still trying to keep pace with their own inventions felt surprisingly modern. While I didn't sense outright malice, the descriptions of Asian countries and indigenous nations often felt distasteful and derogatory. Cultures are frequently presented through a colonial lens as exotic backdrops or obstacles to the protagonist's schedule rather than as fully realized places in their own perspectives. Ironically, for a travel-centered novel, I wished for more vivid moods and atmospheres. We get glimpses of places, especially through Passepartout's eyes, but I think that Verne could have expanded on these scenes to give the journey a more emotional and sensory impact. All in all, I'm glad I read Around the World in 80 Days, and I feel a sense of accomplishment ticking off my first classic of the year. I'd describe it as fun but dated, a fast-moving adventure with structural and cultural elements that clearly belong in the 19th century, but with ideas about technology and progress that still resonate today. This experience also made me curious about retellings set in other time periods or told from different perspectives. I'd be very interested in modern reimaginings that keep the sense of urgency and problem solving, but offer richer characters and more thoughtful, inclusive portrayals of the places and people encountered along the way. Have you come across any retellings of Around the World in 80 Days that I'd maybe want to check out? Leave it in the comments below. Wild Dark Shore is a multi-perspective novel in which every character is guarding some private truth. Rowan washes up on Shearwater, a barrier island off the coast of Antarctica, with no clear explanation for how she got there. She's rescued from the rocks in the middle of a storm by the Salt family, the island's remaining inhabitants. Rowan is immediately suspicious of Dominic, the father, while slowly and messily stumbling into love for his children. Her arrival becomes an inflection point for everyone on the island as they're forced to confront buried traumas and long-avoided conversations. All of this unfolds against the eerie backdrop of a desolate island that once housed both a research station and a global seed bank, an archive of the world's possible futures slowly being evacuated as the seas rise. The setting is where this book absolutely sings. I felt fully immersed in the rhythms of life on Shearwater as the characters went about their days on this bleak, wind-lashed island. It feels haunted, not just by the characters' own histories, but by the island's long and bloody past as a processing site for seal and penguin hunts in the 19th century. Despite having never been anywhere remotely like it, I could feel the salt sting, the isolation, the heavy, almost sentient presence of the land. If I've ever read a contemporary Gothic novel, this is it. The mood is thick with unease, grief, and decay, but there's also a fragile thread of tenderness running through it, like a candle you're constantly shielding from the wind. I related most strongly to Rowan, even when I didn't agree with her. Her decision not to have children, and the way that people doubt, question, or refuse to accept that, hit very close to home. Her choice to undertake an obviously dangerous journey, rather than involving more traditional authorities, felt baffling and strained my suspension of disbelief. I also found Dominic and Fenn frustrating, though in ways that felt intentional. I can't imagine living on an almost deserted Antarctic island with only your family for company. but that sheer lack of honest communication between them was still maddening to read. Experiencing that silence from multiple perspectives only emphasized how much love existed beneath it all, and how little anyone was able to say out loud. McConaghy's handling of family, loyalty, and conflict is one of the most fascinating aspects of this book. We're essentially shown three families in parallel: Dominic's family on Shearwater, Rowan's childhood family, and Rowan's adult married life. The slow reveal of key information in each of these timelines kept me from jumping to neat conclusions too early. I was constantly reminded that I don't have all of the answers, and I probably never will. The most powerful relationship for me was between Rowan and Orly. Their connection felt intentional and carefully developed. Rowan's cynicism slips out in fragments when she talks to him, and you can see the weight of her worldview brushing against his still intact innocence. Orly's happy chatter sometimes spills secrets and sometimes protects them more fiercely than the adults realize. In contrast, Raph remains so much of a loner that he ends up feeling almost as remote as Fen, only without the comfort and clarity of the animal community that grounds her. I ended up wanting more from him than I ultimately got in this story. The themes that I got from this book were around childhood and innocence, motherhood and non-motherhood, grief, climate change, and the natural world. McConaghy weaves grief and climate change together through the Gothic tone and through the various landscapes we move through: the hillside of New Zealand, the haunted, eroding shores of Shearwater, and the unknowable depths of the ocean. The result is a story where environmental catastrophe and personal loss feel inseparable. Emotionally, I oscillated between hope and anger. Orly's passages, especially his fascination with the resilience of seeds, mirror his own resilience and innocence. The parallel was one of my favorite elements in the book. My biggest sticking point was the ending. I felt like the ending was more poetic than realistic. Overall, Wild Dark Shore is a beautifully written contemporary Gothic novel about family, survival, and the costs of loving anything in a dying world. I recommend it to readers who enjoy slow-burning, atmospheric stories with emotionally complex characters and who don't mind when an ending chooses the poetic resonance over strict realism. The Drums of Autumn is the fourth book in the Outlander series, and as it's a sequel, it is hard to not spoil anything from previous books, so I'm putting the time code on the screen for you to jump ahead if you have not read previous Outlander books, but it was published in the 90s, so spoilers are out there everywhere. Drums of Autumn was a fantastic read that made my commute fly by, literally. I listened to it on Audible in the car and often found myself tempted to keep driving or just sit in the driveway a little longer to hear what happened next. I've read the first 3 Outlander novels, and for me, this series just keeps getting better. I enjoyed the first 2, but Voyager pushed the series into 5-star territory, and Drums of Autumn absolutely keeps it there. Going into this book, I expected the usual Gabaldon blend of history, romance, and action with a primary focus on the historical setting. I knew that the story would split its attention between Claire and Jamie, and the newer pairing of Brianna and Roger. And I wasn't sure how I'd feel about that shift. To my surprise, the book both subverted and exceeded my expectations. The parallel plot lines following Bree and Roger are heavily featured here, and I didn't expect to enjoy the spotlight moving away from Claire and Jamie as much as I did. Back in the modern day, Brianna finishes her college degree while maintaining a long-distance relationship with Roger. After learning the truth about her parents, she gives Roger the slip and travels through the stones to reunite with her mother and meet her newly revealed father. Roger pieces things together just a little too late and then obsessively plans his own trip through the stones at the next opportunity, months later. He follows Bree across the Atlantic, catches up to her just long enough to confirm she wants him there, and then they're separated again. From there, their paths diverge sharply. Jamie, in all his overprotective, era-appropriate glory, makes decisions that leave Roger in the hands of an indigenous population, and Roger spends much of the book as a captive. Brianna, meanwhile, realizes she's pregnant and is unsure of who the father is. She doesn't learn what happens to Roger for months. This is a long book, and the pacing is undeniably slow, but that wasn't a bad thing for me. It's the kind of slow that feels immersive rather than dull. That said, the transatlantic passages dragged a bit. Realistically, such a crossing in that era would have been repetitive and dangerous in small, mundane ways, and the book reflects that. The characters are where this book truly shines for me. I felt deeply for Roger through his ordeal. He's driven by love, but also by a clear internal logic that makes his decisions feel grounded and understandable. Claire remains very easy to relate to, compassionate, practical, and always trying to bridge modern medical sensibilities with 18th century realities. Brianna, who previously felt somewhat flat to me, really came to life in this book. She grew on me even as she frustrated me. Her headstrong nature, something I recognize in myself, can tip into recklessness, especially given her lack of awareness or even disregard for the time period she's in. I appreciated her development even when I was mentally yelling at her choices. Jamie, meanwhile, is no longer the untouchable golden boy. We see more of his flaws and the ways that he fits the archetype of an 18th century man. On one hand, this grounds his character and makes him feel more realistic. On the other, it can be infuriating. I was firmly on Brianna's side during their conflict, yet when it comes to Brianna's and Roger's relationship, I generally found myself siding more with Roger. He struck me as the more logical, with the right balance of emotion and restraint. And Lord John, as always, is a delight. His scenes with Bree often made me laugh, his polite sarcasm consistently hit the right note, and provided levity while still feeling emotionally grounded. Some of the most prominent themes here are duty, family, freedom, and love, especially how these themes collide with time, place, and historical context. This book also made me think differently about the way that we learn history. Traditional history education focuses heavily on big events in population centers, mostly because those are the events that are well recorded. Drums of Autumn highlights the reality that homesteads like Fraser's Ridge were cropping up all over colonial America. The small-scale politics, community dynamics, and personal tensions between colonists and representatives of the British government add a vivid layer of color to a time period that can otherwise feel overfamiliar. Gabaldon's writing here hits a sweet spot for me. It's descriptive without being overwrought. She trusts the reader to fill in the gaps without belaboring every point. She particularly excels at setting, taking a few beats to let us soak in the surroundings between big conversations or bursts of action. The domestic scenes are especially well done. I could clearly picture rooms, furniture, and everyday objects, and I often felt like I was physically moving around the space alongside the characters. In the end, what I loved most about Drums of Autumn were the characters, relationships, and atmosphere. I also really enjoyed seeing Claire lean further into her intuition, and I'm excited to see where that element of her character goes in future books. For me, Drums of Autumn absolutely earns its 5-star rating. And now we'll flip back to the beginning of my journal to fill out my annual trackers. First up is my bookshelf. You can see the first shelf and the top of it has a color key of sorts. This is each genre represented by a different color, and I've got the number of the color conveniently and subtly hidden on the books up above. This is my reference to then add the colors to the books on the shelf. I went with a consistent color palette in the cool tones, but I wanted a lot more variety than I've gotten in previous bookshelves. Here we are at my goals page. We've got 3 books finished in January, and one of them is a classic. Next, we have my book bingo. This is based on one by Amanda Maid, where we have a prompt and we have a hidden coordinate underneath some washi tape. I decided on translated for Around the World in 80 Days, which was originally written in French. And then originally I was going to do multiple POVs was Wild Dark Shore, but I felt like Drums of Autumn made more sense there. And then I put Wild Dark Shore in Thriller. As you might have picked up from my book reviews section of the video, Drums of Autumn was my favorite book of the month. Now we're in my series tracker. I'm only going to be putting series on here as I continue them, so I don't end up with a bunch of series that I'm not actively working on. So Outlander is the first series where I've continued it this year. And now we're at my annual reading tracker. I track how many minutes a day I read in my everyday journal. Then at the end of the month, I transfer all of those numbers over to this annual tracker. It's handy to see if there's a streak of days where I'm not reading very much, or if there's a pattern month to month where I'm reading less or more. And the last spread that I'll be working on here is my calendar, where I write out from the beginning date and the end date with a line continuing in between for each book that I am reading. There are a few more books that are going to be on this month than I have in this video because I started but did not finish a few books near the end of the month. I'm using the same pens that I've been using throughout the January setup for continuity. Let me know in the comments below, have you read any of the books that we covered today? Are there any other books that you would recommend to me based off of these books that we've finished? Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading!